My son-in-law threw my suitcases into the snow and called me a burden. He didn't know I was worth millions. 3 months later, I didn't just come back. I came back as his landlord, and I tripled his rent. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and subscribe to Never Too Old channel. We are creating a community of incredible people who know that our beast chapters can happen at any age. Now back to the story. The zipper of my suitcase snapped shut like a gunshot in the silent, expensive condo. I was folding my sweaters when the first black trash bag hit the floor. It didn't sound like clothes falling. It sounded like a life being thrown away. I looked up. Brad was standing in the doorway of the guest room, his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing the Italian leather loafers I had bought him for Christmas last year. He looked at me like I was a stain on his carpet. "Look, Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "We have to be realistic. The market is crashing. My commissions are down. We just cannot afford an extra mouth to feed right now." An extra mouth. I sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed my skirt. My hands were steady. They were the hands of a woman who had spent 40 years as a forensic accountant hunting down corporate fraud and sending CEOs to prison. But right now, to this man, I was just an old woman who had outlived her usefulness. I sold my 5-bedroom house in Oak Park 6 months ago. I handed you a check for $200,000. I said the words quietly. I thought I was investing in your future. I thought I was helping you buy this condo so my granddaughter Maya would have a stable home. Brad laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. That was a gift, Evelyn. Gifts do not come with a lifetime residency clause. Besides, $200,000 does not go far in this economy. That money is gone. Gone. In 6 months. I looked at the designer watch on his wrist. I looked at the 60-inch television mounted on the wall in the living room. I knew exactly where the money had gone, but I did not say a word. Not yet. "You have your Social Security." Brad continued, checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. "There is a shelter on 35th Street. They take seniors. I called them. They have a bed open tonight." He picked up the second trash bag and walked to the front door. He opened it. The Chicago wind howled in carrying snow that bit my skin instantly. He threw my bag out onto the mat. It slid across the ice and stopped against the railing. I stood up. My knees popped. At 65, the cold gets into your bones fast. I put on my coat. I did not look at the photos on the wall. I did not look at the kitchen where I had cooked their dinner every night for 3 months. I walked to the door. Brad did not move out of the way. He forced me to squeeze past him. "Get your things, Evelyn," he said. "And do not make a scene. The neighbors are watching." I stepped out into the snow. The door slammed shut behind me. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was loud and final. I stood there in the freezing wind, staring at the closed door. My son-in-law thought he had just taken out the trash. He had no idea he had just started a war. I stood there in the biting wind and looked past Brad's shoulder. I was not looking at him anymore. He was just a greedy stranger. I was looking for the girl I had raised. I was looking for Jasmine. She was standing in the hallway just out of the reach of the snowflakes, wrapped in a cashmere cardigan I knew cost $300 because I was the one who paid the credit card bill last month. "Jasmine," I said. My voice did not shake. I refused to let it shake. "Are you going to let him do this? Are you going to let him throw your mother out into a blizzard?" For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to hide behind my legs when it thundered. She looked down at her feet. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. She did everything except look me in the eye. Then she took a breath and looked up, and I saw something in her face that broke my heart more than the cold ever could. It was relief. She wanted me gone too. "Mom, please," she said, her voice thin and whining. "You have to understand. Brad is under a lot of stress. We need our space. We are trying to build a marriage here, and having you around all the time, watching us, judging us, it is just too much pressure. We need space to be a couple." Space. The word hung in the freezing air between us. I looked at this woman who was standing in the warmth of the condo I paid for and talking about space. My mind flashed back to 6 months ago. I was sitting in the title office, pen in hand. The ink was still wet on the check for $200,000. It was every cent of profit from the sale of my home. The home where Jasmine took her first steps. The home where I nursed my husband until his last breath. I had sold it all. I had cashed out my life to give them a down payment. I remembered Jasmine hugging me that day, tears in her eyes, saying, "Mom, you will never have to worry about anything again. This is our home now. We are going to take care of you the way you took care of us." That promise had lasted exactly 180 days. I realized then with a clarity that was colder than the wind that I had been played. I was not a family member to them. I was a transaction. I was a bank account that had finally run dry. They had squeezed every drop of equity out of my life, and now that the money was gone, I was just a piece of furniture that took up too much room. "You are right, Jasmine," I said quietly. "You do need space." I looked at her one last time. I memorized the weakness in her chin and the selfishness in her eyes. I wanted to remember exactly what betrayal looked like so I would never make the mistake of trusting it again. "Go inside," I told her. "You will get cold standing there." She didn't even say goodbye. She just stepped back and let Brad close the door. The heavy wood shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. I was alone. I had no home. I had no cash in my pocket. I had given them everything. But as I turned away from the door and dragged my suitcases toward the street, a fire started to burn in my chest. They thought they had taken everything from me. They were wrong. They had left me with the one thing that mattered most. They had left me with my anger. And they had forgotten who I used to be. I dragged my suitcase down the walkway, my boots crunching on the ice. The wind was whipping my face, stinging my eyes, but I refused to wipe them. I would not let the neighbors see Evelyn St. James cry. I had walked 10 feet when I heard a sound from above. It was the distinct creak of a window sash being forced open against the ice. I stopped and looked up. On the second floor, a small figure was leaning out into the storm. It was Maya, my 16-year-old granddaughter, the only person in that house with a heart that actually beat. She did not say a word. She knew Brad would hear her if she shouted. Instead, she dropped something. It fell through the snow like a wounded bird and landed softly on top of my suitcase. It was a scarf, a purple wool scarf I had knitted for her 2 winters ago. I picked it up, my fingers numb from the cold. It felt heavy. There was something wrapped inside. I unfolded the wool, and something green fluttered in the wind. I caught it just before it blew away. It was a $20 bill. I stared at that crumpled piece of paper in the dim streetlight. It was old and soft, like it had been kept in a pocket for a long time. I knew what this was. This was her emergency money. This was lunch money. This was everything she had. While her father was sitting in a warm condo wearing Italian loafers bought with my life savings, telling me he could not afford to feed me, his teenage daughter was throwing her last $20 out a window to make sure I did not starve. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text message from Maya. "Grandma, I am so sorry. I hate them. Please take this. I will find a way to get more." I looked back up at the window. Maya was shivering, her hand pressed against the glass. She was crying. Seeing her tears did something to me that the cold and the betrayal could not. It snapped something back into place inside my chest. For the last hour, I had felt like an old woman. I had felt like a victim. I had felt like a fool who gave away her fortune to a con artist. But standing there clutching that $20 bill, I felt a change. The shame evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard rage began to settle, a familiar feeling. It was the same feeling I used to get right before I walked into a courtroom to testify against a corrupt CEO. I looked at that $20. It was worth more than the $200,000 I had lost. It was a seed. It was a contract. I looked up at Maya and nodded once. I wiped my face and straightened my back. I put the money in my pocket and wrapped the scarf around my neck. It smelled like lavender and innocence. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had thrown out the trash, but they had made a fatal error. They had forgotten that I was the only thing standing between them and the consequences of their actions. And now they had trapped my granddaughter in that house with them. I turned my back on the condo. I gripped the handle of my suitcase. I was not just walking away to survive anymore. I was walking away to plan a rescue mission. I was going to come back for that girl. And when I did, I would not be knocking on the door, asking for a place to sleep. I would be kicking the door down. Maya just bought herself a front row seat to her father's destruction, and I was going to make sure she got her money's worth. I walked 2 blocks until the lights of the condo faded into the swirling snow. I stopped under a broken street lamp on the corner of 4th and Main. To anyone passing by, I looked like a homeless senior citizen clutching a battered suitcase and a broken heart. Perfect. That was exactly what I wanted Brad and the neighbors to see. But as soon as I turned the corner and knew I was out of their sight, I reached into the hidden lining of my coat. I did not pull out a tissue to dry my tears. I pulled out a satellite phone that cost more than Brad's car payments for a year. I pressed one button, speed dial 1. Less than 3 minutes later, a long black Lincoln Town car slid silently to the curb. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like oil spills. The driver stepped out into the blizzard, ignoring the biting wind. He did not look at my old coat or my snowy boots or the cheap suitcase. He looked straight at me, with the respect of a soldier greeting a general. "Good evening, Mrs. St. James," he said, holding the door open, his voice cutting through the howling wind. "We have the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton prepared as you requested. Shall I take your bag?" I handed him the suitcase. I slid onto the heated leather seats. The warmth hit me like a physical blow, washing away the chill of the last 3 months. The door clicked shut, sealing out the noise of the storm and the noise of my daughter's betrayal. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since Thanksgiving. For 90 days I had played the part. The doting grandmother, the widow living on a fixed income, the helpless old lady who needed a roof over her head. It was the hardest undercover job of my life. Brad and Jasmine thought I was a retired bookkeeper for a local library. They never asked why I traveled to New York so often in the 90s. They never asked where the money for their private schools really came from. They were too self-absorbed to ask the right questions. They didn't know that for 30 years, I was the lead forensic accountant for the largest firm in Chicago. I didn't just balance checkbooks. I hunted wolves. I tracked embezzled millions through shell companies in the Caymans. I exposed Ponzi schemes that made the news. I sent men far smarter and far more dangerous than my son-in-law to federal prison. They thought the $200,000 from the house sale was my entire net worth. That was just my walking around money. That was the bait. They didn't know about the blind trusts, the diversified portfolios, the assets I had tucked away specifically to ensure that if I ever needed to go to war, I would have the ammunition. I had played the pauper to see if they loved me for me. They failed the test. Now they were going to face the examiner. I pulled off the wool hat and shook out my hair. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The sad, confused old lady was gone. Evelyn St. James, the auditor, was back. I tapped the partition. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping the tremor of the grandmother and returning to the steel of the executive. "Get the legal team on the secure line and find out who holds the note to 455 Park Avenue. I want to know who owns the building my son-in-law lives in. By tomorrow morning, I want to be the one holding the mortgage." It is time to show Brad what a real shark looks like. The coffee on the mahogany desk was hot and black, just the way I liked it. It matched the mood in the room. I was not sitting in a cold guest room anymore. I was in the penthouse of the Ritz-Carlton, surrounded by 3 high-definition monitors. My fingers flew across the illuminated keyboard. I was not Evelyn, the mother-in-law. I was Evelyn, the forensic auditor, and I was performing an autopsy on Brad's financial life. It took me less than 10 minutes to bypass his weak passwords. Brad was the kind of man who used his birthday for everything. Arrogant enough to think no one would guess it, and stupid enough not to change it. I logged into the credit bureaus first. The screen flickered and his financial soul was laid bare in red numbers. Brad liked to call himself a real estate mogul. He told Jasmine he was closing deals left and right. He told the neighbors he was waiting for the market to correct before making his next big move. The truth was on my screen. His credit score was 520. That is not a mogul. That is a financial corpse. He had 3 credit cards maxed out to the limit and a lawsuit pending from a client who claimed Brad took a deposit for a condo that did not exist. But I was looking for the big fish. I was looking for my $200,000. I pulled up his primary checking account. I scrolled back 6 months to the day the wire transfer from my house sale hit his account. There it was, a deposit of $200,000, and then the bleeding started. I watched the money vanish transaction by transaction. It did not go into a savings account. It did not go into an index fund. It did not go toward the principal of the condo they were renting. $50,000 to an offshore gambling site, $10,000 to a sports betting app, $5,000 for a table at a nightclub. It was a catalog of insecurity and addiction. He was not investing. He was hemorrhaging money trying to buy an image he could not afford. Then I saw the biggest transaction. $80,000. A down payment. I clicked on the details. It was to a luxury car dealership. A Porsche. My blood ran cold. I realized then that the black SUV parked in the reserved spot at their building, the one he told me belonged to a client, was actually his. He had used my retirement money to buy a car he could not afford to impress people who did not care about him. He was driving my house. He was driving my husband's life insurance. He was driving my future around town while telling me he could not afford to buy extra groceries. I sat back in the leather chair. I did not feel sad. I felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. I had the evidence. Brad was not just broke. He was drowning. He was a fraud living on borrowed time and stolen money. And the best part was, he had absolutely no idea that the person he had just kicked out into the snow was the only person who had actually looked at his balance sheet. He thought he was the king of the castle. But I was looking at the mortgage records now. The owner of his building was not a person. It was a holding company that had just filed for bankruptcy protection. The building was a distressed asset. It was up for grabs. I smiled at the glowing screens. Brad was swimming with sharks, and he did not even know he was bleeding. I picked up the phone. It was time to buy a building. I pulled up the property tax records for 455 Park Avenue on the center monitor. The screen glowed with the kind of data that usually makes investors run for the hills, but makes forensic accountants like me lean closer. The building was not just owned by a failing company, it was a financial disaster zone. The current owners, a shell corporation out of Delaware, had not paid property taxes in 2 years. There were mechanical liens against the title from unpaid elevator repair companies. The water bill was 3 months past due. And there it was, in black and white, at the bottom of the file. A notice of default filed by the bank 3 weeks ago. Foreclosure proceedings were active. The auction date was set for next month. This was not a luxury residence. It was a sinking ship. And my son-in-law was rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic while sipping champagne he bought with my retirement money. I zoomed in on the tenant registry attached to the bankruptcy filing. I wanted to see exactly what kind of legal ground Brad was standing on. I scrolled down to Unit 4B. Brad and Jasmine. Lease status expired. Converted to month-to-month tenancy. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. This was the mistake. This was the fatal error that happens when people care more about looking rich than being smart. Brad had let his lease lapse probably because he was dodging the management company about a rent hike, or he was too busy gambling to sign the renewal papers. He was a tenant at will. In Chicago, that meant the landlord could change the terms, raise the rent, or terminate the agreement with just 30 days' notice. He was living on a trapdoor, and he had just handed the lever to the person he hated most in the world. I looked at the asking price for the distressed debt. The bank was desperate. They did not want to manage a residential building in a down market with winter coming. They wanted it off their books. They were looking for a cash buyer who could close fast and take the headache away. The price was steep for a normal person. It was $4.2 million for the note. But for me, for the portfolio I had built over 40 years of catching white-collar criminals and investing the consulting fees wisely, it was manageable. It was less than the value of one of my blind trusts. I sat back in the leather chair of the Ritz-Carlton penthouse and laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the dry, humorless sound of a hunter who just found the prey sleeping in the open. Brad had kicked me out because he said he couldn't afford the rent. He didn't realize that in a matter of days his rent wouldn't be going to a faceless corporation. It would be going to me. Why should I scramble to find a new apartment? Why should I beg for a place to stay? I had the capital, I had the motive, and thanks to Brad's laziness, I had the opportunity. I picked up my secure phone. I didn't call the bank directly. That would be amateur. I called my attorney, Saul. He was the kind of lawyer who didn't ask why you needed a shell company formed at 3 in the morning. He just asked how you wanted to spell the name. Saul, I said, my eyes never leaving the image of the building on my screen. I found a property I want to acquire. 455 Park Avenue. Yes, the one in foreclosure. I want to buy the debt, all of it. Cash offer. There was a pause on the line. Evelyn, Saul asked, his voice thick with sleep. That is a residential building. It is a mess. Why do you want to become a landlord at your age? Why not just rent a nice condo if you need a place to stay? I looked at the photo of Brad standing on the balcony of Unit 4B, a cigar in his hand, looking like he owned the world. Because, Saul, I said, smiling at the screen, why would I rent an apartment when I can just buy the whole building? Besides, I have a tenant who needs a very expensive lesson in hospitality. Get the paperwork ready. We are going shopping. The glass walls of Saul's office on the 45th floor offered a view of the entire Chicago skyline, but I only had eyes for the stack of documents on the mahogany conference table. This was not just paperwork. This was a weapon. Saul slid the formation documents for the new limited liability company across the table. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. He knew exactly what kind of game we were playing. We need a name for the entity, Evelyn, he said, tapping his pen against the signature line. It has to be something generic, something that won't raise red flags if your son-in-law ever decides to actually read his mail. Something corporate and boring. I looked at the document. I thought about the Greek goddess of retribution against those who succumb to hubris. The arrogance before the fall. It fit Brad perfectly. Call it Nemesis Holdings, LLC, I said. Saul smirked. Subtle. He typed the name into the filing software. The registration was instant. Within minutes, Nemesis Holdings was a legal entity in the state of Illinois. It was a ghost ship designed for one purpose: to swallow Brad's world whole. Next came the bank. The distressed asset division of First Chicago was desperate to unload the debt on 455 Park Avenue. They did not care who was buying it. They just wanted the bad numbers off their balance sheet before the end of the quarter. When Saul contacted them with a full cash offer for the note, their relief was palpable. They did not ask why a brand new shell company wanted a failing residential building. They did not ask to meet the principal investor. They just asked how fast we could wire the funds. 48 hours, I told Saul. Tell them we can close in 48 hours if they waive the inspection period. The deal moved at lightning speed. While Brad was likely sitting on his couch watching sports on the 60-inch TV he bought with my money, electronic signatures were flying across secure servers. Millions of dollars moved silently from my blind trust in the Cayman Islands to an escrow account in New York and finally to the bank in Chicago. It was a financial surgical strike. Clean, precise, fatal. 2 days later, I sat in Saul's office again. The final deed of trust was in my hands. The ink was dry. The transfer was recorded with the county clerk. Nemesis Holdings, LLC was now the senior creditor and effective owner of 455 Park Avenue. I ran my fingers over the legal description of the property. It listed the boundaries, the square footage, and the air rights, but what it really represented was leverage. Absolute total leverage. I owned the lobby Brad walked through every morning. I owned the elevator he rode up to the 4th floor. I owned the walls that sheltered him and the roof that kept the snow off his head. He was sleeping inside the belly of the beast, and he thought he was still the captain of the ship. Saul handed me a set of master keys. The property management transfer is effective immediately, he said. We have notified the current management company that their services are terminated. Who do you want to put in charge? I took the heavy ring of keys. They felt cold and solid in my palm. I already have someone in mind, I said, slipping the keys into my purse next to the $20 bill Maya had given me. Someone who understands that rules are made to be followed. I walked out of the office and into the cold Chicago afternoon. I hailed a cab and gave the address, 455 Park Avenue. I did not go inside. I just stood on the opposite street corner, wrapped in my expensive coat, watching the building. I saw the light go on in Unit 4B. I imagined Brad inside, maybe popping open a beer, feeling safe and secure. Enjoy it, Brad, I whispered to the wind. Enjoy the warmth, because the temperature is about to change. I am not just your mother-in-law anymore. I am the bank, and your debt is due." The notification on my secure tablet blinked red at 11:30 at night. It was the signal I had been waiting for. Maya had positioned the hidden camera exactly where I told her. On the high shelf of the bookcase in the living room, masked by a stack of old magazines. I accepted the incoming stream, and the 60-inch monitor in my hotel suite filled with the interior of Unit 4B. It was not a home anymore. It was a frat house. The audio feed crackled with the heavy bass of hip-hop music that was far too loud for a Tuesday night. The living room was packed with people I did not recognize. Men in cheap suits, loosening their ties, holding red plastic cups, spilling beer on the hardwood floors I had paid to refinish. They were Brad's friends, the sycophants and hangers on who thought he was a big shot because he drove a Porsche he didn't own and lived in a condo he didn't pay for. There was Brad standing on the coffee table. He was holding a bottle of champagne. It was the Dom Perignon I had bought for my 65th birthday and saved for a special occasion. He had raided my private stash. To freedom, he shouted, slurring his words, to getting the dead weight out of the house, to finally being the king of my own castle. The room erupted in cheers. I watched Jasmine in the corner. She was laughing too, but her eyes looked nervous. She was holding a glass of wine like a shield. She knew this was wrong, but she was too weak to stop it. Then Brad jumped down from the table. He grabbed a sledgehammer that was leaning against the wall. I leaned forward in my leather chair. "What are you doing, you fool? Watch this, boys," Brad yelled. I always hated how small this living room felt. The old hag took up the best guest room. "Well, she is gone now, and I need a man cave. I need space for the pool table." He swung the hammer. It crashed into the drywall of the bedroom I had slept in for 3 months. The sound was sickening, a crunch of plaster and wood. Dust exploded into the air. The crowd cheered, wild and primal. He swung again and again. He was tearing down the wall. He was destroying the structural integrity of the unit. He was ripping out the electrical wiring without turning off the breaker. Sparks flew. He laughed manically, kicking a hole through the partition. Most mothers would have cried seeing their former sanctuary destroyed. They would have felt the sting of disrespect. But I was not watching this as a mother. I was watching this as a landlord, and I was watching it as a forensic accountant building a case. I opened a new file on my laptop labeled Lease Violations. I started typing. Violation 1, Unauthorized Structural Modification. Violation 2, Destruction of Rental Property. Violation 3, Creating a Fire Hazard. Violation 4, Noise Ordinance Breach. Violation 5, Exceeding Occupancy Limits. Every swing of that hammer was another nail in his coffin. Every hole he punched in that wall was a deductible from a security deposit he didn't have. He thought he was expanding his kingdom. In reality, he was documenting his own eviction. I took a screenshot of him standing in the rubble holding the sledgehammer like a trophy. His face was flushed with victory. He looked so proud of himself. "That makes it a felony," I whispered to the screen. "The damage is over $5,000. That is criminal mischief." I saved the video file. I backed it up to 3 different servers. I sent a copy to my attorney Saul with a simple subject line. Evidence. Brad wanted a man cave. I was going to make sure the only cell he lived in was made of concrete and steel bars. Keep swinging, Brad. You are just digging your own grave, and you are saving me the cost of labor. Monday morning hit the residents of 455 Park Avenue like a bucket of ice water. But for Brad, it was just a hangover. I watched the lobby feed from my hotel suite. He stumbled out of the elevator wearing sunglasses indoors, looking like a man who thought he owned the place. He stopped at the mailboxes. There it was, a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper taped to the glass of the announcement board. Notice to all residents, transfer of ownership. It was simple, it was professional, and it was the first tightening of the noose. Brad ripped it down. He actually ripped the notice off the wall. He read it out loud to Jasmine, who was standing behind him, looking nervous and clutching her purse. Nemesis Holdings, LLC. Brad scoffed, tossing the paper onto the floor. "What kind of name is that? Sounds like a bad comic book villain. Just another faceless corporate slumlord trying to squeeze a dime out of this dump." Jasmine picked up this paper. Her hands were shaking. "Brad," she whispered. "It says here, all existing leases are under review. Ours expired 2 months ago. We never signed the renewal because you said the old management company was trying to rip us off. We are on a month-to-month basis now. They can change the terms whenever they want." Brad laughed. He put his arm around her shoulders, squeezing too hard. "Babe, relax. You are looking at the top sales guy in Chicago real estate. I know how these companies work. They are disorganized. They are lazy. They probably lost the paperwork years ago. Besides, a month-to-month lease is good for us. It means we can leave whenever we want when I close that big deal downtown." I sat in my penthouse and shook my head. He was so confident. He was so wrong. He thought a month-to-month lease meant freedom. He did not understand that in the hands of a hostile landlord, a tenancy at will is a death sentence. It meant I did not need a reason to evict him. It meant I did not need to wait for a lease to expire to raise the rent. It meant he had zero protection. He walked out the front door, stepping over the paper he had thrown on the floor. He thought the new management was just some distant group of investors he could bully or ignore. He thought he was the shark in the tank. He had no idea that Nemesis Holdings was not a corporation. It was a mirror, and it was holding a grudge. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Stone. He was a man I had hired specifically for this job, a former military police officer with zero sense of humor and a strict adherence to the rules. "Mr. Stone," I said, watching Brad get into his Porsche. "The tenant in 4B just vandalized the lobby notice. I think it is time for a full unit inspection. Check everything, and start with the electrical grid." Mr. Stone arrived at Unit 4B at 9 in the morning sharp. He did not knock. He used the master key. He had the legal right to inspect any unit with 24 hours' notice, and that notice had been taped to Brad's door yesterday. Brad was still in his bathrobe when Stone walked in, holding a clipboard like a shield. "Who the hell are you?" Brad shouted, spilling his coffee on the rug. "You cannot just walk in here." "I am the property manager," Stone said, his voice flat and monotone, "and I am conducting a mandatory compliance inspection. Step aside, sir." Stone did not wait for permission. He moved through the condo with the efficiency of a Terminator. He checked the smoke detectors, he checked the plumbing, he checked the windows, and then he started finding the violations. Violation 1, unauthorized pet. A small, trembling chihuahua was hiding under the sofa. The building had a strict no-pet policy that Brad had signed and ignored. Stone took a photo of the dog. Brad tried to block him. "That is just my wife's therapy dog," he lied. "Do you have documentation?" Stone asked without looking up. "No." "Then it is a violation. $500 fine. Violation 2. Smoking indoors." The ashtray on the coffee table was full. The smell of stale smoke clung to the curtains. Brad tried to hide the ashtray behind his back. Stone took a photo of the ash on the table. Cleaning fee, $700, but the real prize was in the guest room, or what used to be the guest room. Stone walked past the hole in the wall that Brad had smashed during his party. He stepped over the debris and looked at the setup in the corner. It was a server farm. 6 high-powered computers were humming loudly, connected by a tangle of wires that looked like a fire hazard waiting to happen. They were mining Bitcoin. The heat coming off them was intense. They were sucking enough electricity to power the entire floor. "What is this?" Stone asked, pointing his pen at the rig. "That is none of your business," Brad snapped, trying to close the door. "That is my private equipment." "It is a commercial operation in a residential unit," Stone said, writing furiously, "and it is an unauthorized modification of the electrical system. You are overloading the grid. This is a severe fire code violation. Immediate cease and desist, or immediate eviction." Brad's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "You cannot evict me for having computers. I know my rights. You have the right to follow the lease you signed," Stone said, tearing off a yellow carbon copy of the inspection report and handing it to Brad. "You have 3 days to remove the dog, the ashtray, and this fire hazard, or legal proceedings will begin. Have a nice day." Stone walked out, leaving Brad standing in the middle of his ruined apartment holding a piece of paper that listed fines totaling over $2,000. I watched on the hidden camera feed. Brad crumpled the paper and threw it at the closed door. He screamed in frustration. He did not know that the fines were just the opening jab. The knockout punch was still coming. The next morning was not calm. It was explosive. Brad stood in the lobby of 455 Park Avenue, waving a piece of paper like it was a declaration of war. It was the official citation from Mr. Stone. It detailed every violation from the inspection and listed the fines. Unauthorized structural modification, $1,000. Unauthorized pet, $500. Smoking, $700. Electrical grid overload, $2,000. Total due immediately, $4,200. Brad was screaming. He was not just angry. He was performing. He wanted the entire building to know he was a victim. He grabbed Mr. Stone by the lapels of his jacket. "You think you can find me," he shouted, spitting as he spoke. "You think you can intimidate me. I know the owner of this building. We are close personal friends. I will have your job by lunchtime." Mr. Stone stood perfectly still. He did not flinch. He did not blink. He just looked at Brad's hands on his jacket. "Sir," he said, his voice calm and dangerous, "I would advise you to remove your hands. That is assault." Assault. Brad laughed a wild, unhinged sound. He ripped the citation in half and threw the pieces in Stone's face. "This is what I think of your fines. This is what I think of your rules. Get out of my sight before I call my lawyer." In the corner of the lobby behind a potted plant, Maya was holding her phone steady. She was filming everything. The angle was perfect. It captured Brad's aggression. It captured the physical contact. It captured the threats. She zoomed in as Brad turned to Jasmine, who was cowering near the mailboxes. "Look at this," he yelled at her. "This is your mother's fault. If she hadn't left that negative energy in the apartment, we wouldn't be dealing with this bad luck." Jasmine looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Brad, it isn't luck," she whispered. "You broke the rules. You tore down a wall." "Shut up," Brad snarled, raising his hand as if to strike her, then stopping when he saw the other residents watching. "Just shut up and go upstairs. I will handle this." He stormed toward the elevator, leaving Jasmine crying in the lobby. Maya lowered her phone. She sent the video to me instantly. I watched it from my hotel suite. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with rage. He had put his hands on my employee. He had threatened my daughter. I saved the video. I forwarded it to Saul. "File for an emergency protective order for the building staff," I typed. "And add this to the eviction file. Threatening behavior toward management is grounds for immediate lease termination." Brad thought he had just put a lowly employee in his place. He thought he had won a battle of wills. He didn't realize he had just handed me the smoking gun. He had documented his own violence. And now I had everything I needed to make sure he never felt safe in that building again. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Stone. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Fine, ma'am," Stone replied, his voice unshakable. "He has a weak grip. Shall I call the police?" "Not yet," I said. "Let him simmer. Let him think he got away with it. Tomorrow, we turn up the heat." The phone rang at 8 in the evening, shattering the quiet luxury of my penthouse suite. I was sitting by the window watching the snow fall over Chicago while eating a lobster bisque that cost more than Brad's weekly grocery budget. I looked at the screen. It was Jasmine. I let it ring twice before answering. I needed to get into character. I cleared my throat, making my voice sound thin and tired. "Hello? Mom, it is me." Jasmine's voice was tight, high-pitched. She sounded like she was being held hostage, which in a way she was. "Jasmine," I said, letting a little tremor enter my voice. "I am glad you called. It is so cold here. The shelter turns the heat down at night to save money." I coughed for effect. "I am eating soup from a can. It isn't much, but it is warm." There was a silence on the line. I could hear heavy breathing. I could hear Brad whispering in the background, urgent and angry hiss. "Ask her. Just ask her." "Mom, listen." Jasmine started. "We are in a bit of a bind. The new management company is really coming down hard on us with these fines. It is unfair, really, but we need to pay them or they might evict us." I closed my eyes. She was asking her homeless mother for money to pay fines for a dog she wasn't supposed to have and a wall her husband smashed. "I don't have any money, Jasmine." I said, my voice trembling just the right amount. "I gave you everything. I have $20 left for the month. Brad wants to know if you have any retirement accounts you didn't tell us about." Jasmine rushed the words out. Maybe a 401k, just something to help us out. You know, as an investment. We could pay you back when Brad closes his next deal. I gripped the phone tight. They were picking the bones of a carcass they thought was already dead. Jasmine, I said, I am sleeping on a cot. I don't have hidden millions. I have nothing because I gave it to you. Suddenly there was a scuffling sound. The phone was snatched away. Brad's voice blasted into my ear, loud and venomous. Stop lying, you old witch. I know you are hoarding cash. You always were stingy. Brad, I said, keeping my voice low and pathetic, please don't yell. I am trying my best. Your best is useless, he spat. You are useless. You come into my house, eat my food, take up my space, and when we need a little help, you cry poverty. You are selfish, Evelyn. You always have been. If you don't send us $3,000 by tomorrow, don't bother ever trying to see your granddaughter again. Do you hear me? You are dead to us until you pay up. The line went dead. He hung up on me. I lowered the phone slowly. I looked at the lobster bisque. I looked at the silk curtains. I looked at the city lights glowing below me. For a long time, I just sat there. I waited for the hurt to come. I waited for the tears. But they didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange sensation. It was lightness. The last heavy chain of guilt, bad, just snapped. I had given them a chance, a tiny microscopic chance to show a shred of humanity, to ask how I was, to apologize. Instead, they tried to shake me down. Brad called me useless. He called me dead to them. I stood up and walked to the window. My reflection stared back at me. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a CEO who just decided to liquidate a failing asset. You want money, Brad, I whispered to the glass. You want to see what I am really worth. Fine. You will get your money's worth tomorrow. But you are not going to like the exchange rate. I picked up the red envelope sitting on my desk. It was already addressed and stamped. I didn't need to think about it anymore. I walked to the door and dropped it in the outgoing mail chute. It slid down into the darkness. The sound was soft like a whisper, but the impact was going to be a bomb. The red envelope was waiting for him at eye level like a target. It was not subtle. It was the color of a stop sign. Brad stepped out of Unit 4B at 8:30, probably heading to a coffee shop to pretend he had clients to meet. He froze when he saw it. It was taped securely to the wood right above the peephole with heavy-duty industrial tape. There was no stamp. This had been hand-delivered by management. I watched the feed on my monitor, coffee in hand. He ripped the envelope off the door, tearing the corner. He did not even wait to go back inside. He tore it open right there in the hallway, his hands shaking slightly. Maybe he thought it was the money he had demanded. Maybe he thought I had caved and sent him a check. He pulled out the single sheet of paper. It was on the letterhead of Nemesis Holdings, LLC. Notice of rent adjustment. I zoomed in on the camera feed so I could see his face as he read the numbers. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he looked like he was going to faint. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He just stared at the paper like it was a death certificate. Jasmine opened the door behind him. "What is it?" she asked. "Is it from Mom?" Brad did not answer. He just handed her the paper. Jasmine read it out loud, her voice trembling. Due to recent property assessments and risk factors associated with your unit, the monthly rent for Unit 4B is hereby adjusted. Effective in 30 days, the new monthly rate will be $7,500. She gasped. $7,500. That is triple what we pay now. That is impossible. Brad, they cannot do this. Brad grabbed the paper back. He read the fine print out loud, his voice rising with every word. This adjustment includes a high-risk tenant surcharge due to documented lease violations, including unauthorized structural damage, electrical grid instability, and fire hazards. Failure to accept these terms constitutes a notice to vacate. He slammed his hand against the wall. $7,000. Who has $7,000 a month for this dump? This is illegal. This is extortion. It is not illegal, Jasmine whispered, tears starting to well up in her eyes. We are month to month, Brad. You said it was fine. You said we did not need a lease. They can charge whatever they want. Brad looked at her with wild panic in his eyes. For the first time since I had known him, the arrogance was gone. replaced by the sheer terror of a man who realizes the math does not work. He had no savings. He had no income. He had a car payment he couldn't afford, and now a rent bill that cost more than he made in 3 months. He slid down the wall and sat on the dirty hallway floor, clutching the red paper. He looked like a deflated balloon. "What are we going to do?" he whispered. "I don't have it. I spent everything on the car and the computers." I took a sip of my coffee in the warm silence of my hotel room. The steam rose from the cup, curling in the air like a question mark. "Welcome to the free market, Brad," I said to the screen. "You wanted to be a big-shot real estate mogul. Well, here is your first lesson. Always read the fine print, and never mess with a landlord who knows your credit score is lower than your IQ." I closed the laptop. The squeeze was on. Now I just had to wait for him to break. The desperation radiating off Brad was almost visible, a frantic energy that made him sweat despite the freezing Chicago wind. I watched the GPS tracker on his phone moving across the city map on my screen. He was running a circuit of humiliation. First he went to the luxury car dealership, probably trying to return the Porsche and get his down payment back. I had already called them. The car had depreciated the moment he drove it off the lot, and with his missed payments, they were more likely to repossess it than refund him. He walked out 10 minutes later, empty-handed and kicking the snow. Next came the so-called friends, the men who had cheered when he smashed my wall, the entourage who drank my Dom Perignon. I listened to the voicemails he left them later. They were pathetic. "Hey Mike, it is Brad. Listen, I am in a little temporary cash flow situation. Just need 10 grand for a week. I am good for it. You know me." Mike did know him. That was the problem. Mike texted back 2 minutes later. "Sorry, bro. You still owe me for the Vegas trip. Cannot help you." One by one, the dominoes fell. The successful real estate mogul was revealed to be a beggar in a designer suit. By noon, he was out of friends. By 1 o'clock, he was out of options. That left the banks. I watched him walk into the First National branch on Michigan Avenue. He straightened his tie and smoothed his hair, trying to look like a man who was not about to be homeless. He thought he could charm a loan officer. He thought he could talk his way into a line of credit. He did not know that I had made a phone call at 8 in the morning. I spent 40 years in this industry. I know the people who run the risk assessment departments. I know the algorithms that flag high-risk borrowers. I simply called an old colleague at the credit bureau and suggested they take a closer look at the recent activity on Brad's Social Security number. I mentioned the gambling debts. I mentioned the erratic spending. I mentioned the sudden change in housing stability. It was not illegal. It was just a friendly tip. A fraud alert. When Brad sat down in that glass office, the banker pulled up his file. I could imagine the screen turning red. His credit score, which was already on life support, had flatlined. His debt-to-income ratio was catastrophic. He was not a borrower. He was a liability. I watched him through the bank's lobby camera feed, which I had accessed with a few keystrokes. The loan officer shook his head. He turned the monitor so Brad could see. Brad stood up, knocking his chair over. He was shouting again, waving his arms. The security guard took a step forward. Brad stormed out of the bank. He stopped on the sidewalk and checked his phone. 0 messages. $0. 0 hope. He looked up at the skyscrapers surrounding him. For the first time, he looked small. The city did not care about him. His friends did not care about him. And the woman he had kicked out into the snow, the only person who had ever actually supported him, was currently watching him suffer from a 5-star hotel room and enjoying every second of it. He had tried to borrow against a future he did not have. Now the present was coming to collect. He could not borrow a dime. He could not even buy a cup of coffee on credit. He was financially radioactive, and I had made sure the Geiger counters were all turned on. The hidden camera feed from Unit 4B showed a scene that was rapidly deteriorating from a domestic dispute into a crime scene. Brad had returned home empty-handed and furious. He was pacing the living room like a caged animal, kicking at the furniture he had bought but could not pay for. Jasmine was sitting on the sofa holding her phone, her face pale. "Where is the money, Brad?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I just checked the joint savings, the account we set up for emergencies. It is empty. There was $15,000 in there last week." Brad stopped pacing. He turned to look at her, his eyes wild. "I needed it," he snapped. "I had to cover some margins. It is an investment, Jasmine. You would not understand." "Investment." She stood up, her voice rising. "You spent it on gambling, didn't you? You spent our emergency fund on sports bets while we are about to be evicted. My mother gave us everything and you threw it away." "Don't you talk to me about your mother," Brad shouted, getting in her face. "That old leech is the reason we are in this mess. If she hadn't been sucking us dry for 3 months, we would be fine." He was lying and he knew it, but his ego could not handle the truth. Jasmine pushed him back. "She is not a leech," she screamed. "She sold her house for us. She gave you $200,000 and you wasted it. You are a failure, Brad. You are a fraud." The slap echoed through the speakers loud and sharp. Brad's hand connected with Jasmine's cheek, knocking her back onto the sofa. The room went silent. Jasmine held her face, staring at him in shock. Brad looked at his hand, breathing heavy. He didn't look sorry. He looked like a man who had finally lost control of the narrative. "Look what you made me do," he hissed. In the bedroom down the hall, Maya was huddled in the back of her closet. She was holding her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. The message popped up on my tablet, instant and terrifying. "Grandma, he hit her. He hit Mom. I am scared. Please come." I read the message. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind was ice cold. This was it. The line had been crossed. He had not just stolen my money. He had not just disrespected me. He had put his hands on my daughter. I stood up in the penthouse suite. I didn't need to watch anymore. I didn't need to wait for the eviction notice to expire. I didn't need to wait for the bank to seize his car. The game was over. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I had kept on speed dial for this exact moment. Not the police, not yet. I called the private security team I had stationed in the lobby of 4 and 55 Park Avenue for the last 24 hours. "Execute Phase Omega." I said, my voice steady. "Secure the hallway outside Unit 4B. Do not let him leave. I am coming down." I grabbed my purse. Inside was the master key to the building, the deed to the property, and the evidence file that would put Brad away for a long time. I put on my coat. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The grandmother was gone. The victim was gone. The executioner was ready. "Hang on, Maya," I whispered to the empty room. "The cavalry is coming, and we are not bringing blankets. We are bringing handcuffs." The email came through at 2 in the morning. I was sitting in the back of the town car parked just down the street from the building watching the lights in Unit 4B. Brad had stopped pacing. He had gone to his computer. He was typing with the frantic energy of a cornered rat trying to gnaw its way through a steel cage. I opened the message on my tablet. It was addressed to the legal department of Nemesis Holdings, LLC. The subject line was in all capital letters. "Notice of intent to sue." I read it, and I almost laughed. It was a masterpiece of delusion. Brad claimed he was a victim of harassment. He claimed the electrical inspection was illegal. He claimed he had personal connections with the mayor of Chicago and threatened to bring the full weight of the city down on our heads if we did not drop the fines and reduce the rent immediately. He demanded a face-to-face meeting with the owner to settle this like men. He was bluffing with an empty hand. He thought Nemesis Holdings was some faceless corporate entity that would be scared of a lawsuit. He thought he could bully his way out of bankruptcy, just like he bullied his way through his marriage. He did not know he was emailing the woman whose house he had destroyed. I forwarded the email to Saul, my attorney, who was sitting right beside me in the car. "Reply to him," I said. "Give him exactly what he wants." Saul typed the response. It was short, professional, and lethal. "Dear Mr. Wilson, the chairman of Nemesis Holdings has reviewed your correspondence. We take allegations of harassment very seriously. The owner agrees that a personal meeting is necessary to resolve these matters immediately. The owner will meet you in the lobby of 455 Park Avenue tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Please be punctual." I watched the feed from the apartment. Brad's phone pinged. He read the email. A slow, smug smile spread across his face. The panic vanished, replaced instantly by his usual arrogance. He turned to Jasmine, who was holding an ice pack to her cheek. "See?" he said, gesturing at his phone. "I told you I would handle it. I scared them. They want to meet. They want to settle." He puffed out his chest. I am going to walk down there tomorrow, and I am going to own that room. I will get the rent lowered. I might even get them to pay us for the inconvenience. You just watch, Jasmine. This is how business is done. He truly believed it. He believed his own lie so completely, it was almost impressive. He thought he had won. He thought he had intimidated the landlord. He had no idea he had just accepted an invitation to his own execution. I looked at the time. 6 hours until 9 o'clock. 6 hours for him to sleep and dream of victory. 6 hours for me to prepare the final blow. I tapped the driver on the shoulder. "Take me back to the hotel," I said. "I need to change. If I'm going to play the part of the high-powered owner, I need to look the part." Brad wanted to meet the boss. Well, he was going to get exactly what he asked for, and I was going to make sure he never forgot the introduction. The lobby clock ticked over to 9 o'clock, and the silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Brad stood in the center of the marble floor, checking his watch with an exaggerated motion, ensuring that every neighbor pretending to collect their mail saw his impatience. He smoothed the lapels of his navy suit, the one he thought made him look like a titan of industry, rather than a man drowning in debt. Beside him, Jasmine shrank against a pillar wearing large sunglasses to hide the bruise on her cheek, trying to make herself invisible. Typical Brad announced loudly, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "These corporate cowards are all the same. They send threatening letters, but they do not have the courage to look a man in the eye." He turned to the security guard at the front desk. "Call their office. Tell them if the owner is not here in 60 seconds, I am leaving, and the next time they hear from me, it will be through a lawsuit." The guard did not reach for the phone. He just looked past Brad's shoulder toward the back of the lobby. The golden doors of the private elevator, the one that had been locked for maintenance for months, were sliding open with a soft chime. Brad turned a smug smile plastered on his face, ready to bully whoever walked out. He expected a nervous property manager or a mid-level bureaucrat in a cheap suit. He did not expect me. I stepped out of the elevator. The click of my heels on the marble was sharp and rhythmic, like the ticking of a countdown timer. I was not wearing the old wool coat and worn boots I had left in 3 months ago. I was wearing a tailored charcoal Chanel suit, silk blouse, and the pearl necklace Spencer had given me for our 30th anniversary. I stood tall, my shoulders back, my head high. Flanking me were 2 men in dark suits, Saul, my attorney, and the head of my private security detail. Brad blinked. His brain clearly could not process the image in front of him. He looked from me to the elevator, then back to me. The smug smile faltered for a second, then returned twisted into a sneer of disbelief. "Evelyn!" he barked, laughing harshly. "What the hell are you doing here? Did you follow us downstairs to beg for money again?" He took a step toward me, waving his hand dismissively, as if shooing away a stray dog. "Get out of here. I am in the middle of a very important business meeting with the building owner. You are embarrassing, Jasmine. Go wait outside in the snow." I did not stop walking. I moved toward him until I was standing directly in his personal space. I did not flinch. I did not look down. I slowly removed my sunglasses and locked eyes with him. "You wanted to meet the owner, Brad," I said, my voice calm and ice cold. "You sent an email demanding a face-to-face meeting to settle this like men. You threatened legal action if the chairman of Nemesis Holdings did not show up." Brad looked confused, his eyes darting around the empty lobby behind me. "Yeah, I did. So where is he? Is he hiding behind his mother-in-law?" Saul stepped forward smoothly, interjecting himself between us. He opened a leather portfolio and held up a document stamped with the official seal of the city registrar. "Mr. Wilson, please allow me to facilitate the introduction," Saul said, his voice projecting clearly to the neighbors watching from the mailroom. "You are speaking to the chairman and sole proprietor of Nemesis Holdings, LLC." He gestured to me. "This is Mrs. Evelyn St. James. She purchased the distressed debt on this property 3 months ago. She is the title holder of 455 Park Avenue. She owns the walls you live in, the roof over your head, and the floor you are standing on. And you are currently 3 months behind on payments to her." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a reality crashing down. Brad's face went from red to a sickly shade of gray. His eyes bulged. He looked at the deed in Saul's hand, then at me, then back at the deed. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled onto a dock. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "That is impossible. You are broke. You are a homeless old woman. I kicked you out." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who has finally closed the trap. "I am a forensic accountant, Brad. I spent 40 years hunting men who thought they were smarter than the numbers. I know where every penny goes, and I know exactly what you are worth." "Zero!" I snapped my fingers. The security guard stepped forward and handed me a thick manila envelope. I held it up. Now I said, stepping closer until Brad had to step back in fear, "Let us discuss your eviction." Brad tore open the envelope and photos spilled out onto the marble floor. They were high-resolution images of him smashing my wall with a sledgehammer and screaming in Mr. Stone's face. But the real heavy hitter was the stack of bank records underneath. "I traced the loans you took out in my name, Brad," I said, my voice echoing in the silent lobby. "I traced the credit cards you opened using Jasmine's social security number without her knowing. That is identity theft. That is bank fraud. And hitting my daughter earlier tonight, that is assault." Brad looked up, his face pale and sweating. He looked at the security team flanking me, then at the evidence on the floor. He started to lunge toward me, his fists clenched, desperate to silence the truth. That was the moment the revolving doors spun open behind me. 4 police officers marched in. I had called them 10 minutes ago when I saw him strike Jasmine on the camera feed. They didn't ask questions. They saw a man charging an elderly woman and they reacted. Brad was on the ground in seconds, his face pressed against the cold marble he claimed to own. As they cuffed him, he started crying. Not manly tears. He wailed like a child who dropped his ice cream. It was pathetic. Jasmine ran to me, grabbing my arm, her eyes wide with desperate hope. "Mom, thank God. You saved us. I knew you would come back. Can we go to your hotel? I cannot stay here alone. I need money for a lawyer for Brad." I pulled my arm away gently but firmly. I looked at my daughter, the woman who watched her husband throw my clothes into the snow and said nothing. The woman who let her husband spend my life savings on a car while her daughter went hungry. "No, Jasmine," I said. "You chose your husband when times were good. You stood by him when he was cruel. You can stand by him now that he is facing the consequences. You are not homeless. You have a month-to-month lease. I suggest you find a job to pay the rent or pack your bags." Jasmine stared at me, her mouth open in shock. She finally realized the bank of Mom was closed forever. I turned to the corner where Maya was standing, shivering in her coat holding a backpack. She looked terrified and hopeful all at once. "Come here, sweetheart," I said, opening my arms. "You are coming home with me. Not to a hotel, to the penthouse next door." I bought that too. Maya ran into my arms and I held her tight. The only valuable thing I had managed to salvage from the wreckage of this family. An hour later, we were sitting in the living room of my new apartment. It was warm. The fireplace was crackling. We were drinking tea out of delicate porcelain cups. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, we looked down at the street below. We saw the flashing blue lights of the police cruiser. We saw Brad being shoved into the back seat, still wearing his expensive suit that was now rumpled and stained. We saw Jasmine standing on the sidewalk alone in the snow, watching him go. I took a sip of tea. It tasted like victory. Some people say I was too hard on my own daughter. They say family should forgive everything. But I say you teach people how to treat you. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone hit rock bottom so they finally learn to stand up on their own. I looked at Maya, safe and smiling for the first time in months. I made the right choice. Would you have done the same? This story teaches us a powerful lesson about the danger of underestimating someone based on their age or their silence. Brad and Jasmine looked at me and saw a burden. They failed to see the decades of grit, intelligence, and resilience that built the very life they were trying to steal. They mistook my generosity for foolishness and my patience for weakness. The hardest truth I had to accept was that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for toxic family members is to let them hit rock bottom. We spend our lives trying to be the safety net for our children, but when they start cutting the ropes, we have to step back and let them fall. I didn't destroy their lives. I simply removed the cushion I had provided and let the consequences of their own actions catch them. Dignity is not negotiable, and respect is not optional, even from your own blood. Never let anyone make you feel small in a world you helped build. So what do you think? Did I go too far with my revenge, or was it exactly what they deserved? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about taking back your power.